You're listening to Leadership Loading, a podcast that inspires leaders to be continuous learners and provides insight for those making the leap from the front line to the boardroom. My name is Jason McLaren, and I'm an Air Force firefighter veteran and safety expert turned entrepreneur and nonprofit director. I'm sitting down with industry leaders to talk about their leadership traits and lessons they have learned that can make an impact on future leaders. Hey everyone, my name is Jason McLaren, host for Leadership Loading, and my guest today is Ashley Madden. Ashley is an entrepreneur and free spirit nomad, and she's actually coming to us from all across the other side of the globe. So Ashley, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So we're kicking off our series on resilient leadership, and just thank you for coming on and volunteering to kick off this first episode. These are going to be released in a couple series, but you'll be the first episode of the first series. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into what we're going to talk about today.
Well, right now, as you said, I'm a bit of a traveler. We're actually in Christchurch, but we're about to wind down and settle back in America. And we actually started traveling because I couldn't find a job after graduating. I lived in a big city with, over 10 universities, and there was just too many people graduating. And of course, being married, I couldn't just up and move. So we waited for a while and eventually just decided, well, if we have to move, we might as well travel. And I started freelancing and eventually started my own agency. So I'm a little bit willing to change when it's needed.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what makes a good leader and a good entrepreneur is, being able to bend with the flow and, be able to adapt and overcome, especially being former military. And a lot of the listeners are military or former military. It's that adapt and improvise and make it what you can. And that kind of goes into our topic of the day, and accepting change. So I got a little intro that I wrote. It says, resilient leaders are steady and resolute, but they must also be able to adapt to changing circumstances. And although resilience is often seen as inflexible determination, a leader who is willing to accept the change is inevitable and will stubbornly cling to strategies that are clearly ineffective. What do you think about that?
That's very true. And it's like you said, about being post-military, and I was raised by a father who's a cop, and he recently retired, and he said stuff like this all the time, where if in many ways that I can't outright say, there's things that don't work and you do something else. And if you don't, then you're the problem and not anyone else.
Yeah, I agree. There's things you got to do certain ways and things that have to be done by code or whatever. But then there's things we got to look at and see if we can change. So how can quality professionals become successful change leaders? So how can we, be professional, but also be change leaders in our organization or our company? What do you think?
I think that a lot of it involves looking at the why, looking at what's going on. So if you see an issue, a lot of times it's a response to say, okay, the problem, I need to fix it. How do I fix the problem at hand, instead of looking at why the problem happened? I mean, if you look at businesses that are successful, they don't say, okay, we had low sales, let's get higher sales. They say, okay, we had low sales. What situation caused the low sales? And more than that, they do different things. They'll include their employees instead of just saying, all right, you people need to do this now. They look at their employees and say, you're the ones that actually had this happen. Why did this happen?
Yeah. And I like how you mentioned getting the employees involved. A lot of companies, they do these change management processes and they only get feedback from the higher ups, they get, and then I think that chokes out the organization, because you need that group mentality, and the people on the front lines are the ones that are out there seeing what's
I
going on.
completely agree.
So with that, you mentioned some of the things, but when are some examples when we need to initiate a change? So You mentioned like low sales. Is there anything else that comes to mind?
I think that change, a lot of people see change as, I got low sales. I didn't meet an objective in a business, but it's not always that. It's, are your employees just bored? Are they unhappy, or are you unhappy? Because either case, you're going to need to change to make yourself happy, or you're just going to be miserable. And that might mean quitting. That might mean leaving your position of leadership and going and doing something else. Or if your employees are bored, they're not enjoying their job, you're going to see sales dip low soon, or your objective not be met soon, because when employees aren't happy, they're not going to do as well. So if you fix that situation, you might see not just your objectives met, but higher than your objectives met.
Yeah, definitely. When employees are, I agree. When employees are able to provide that feedback and change, they're more likely to set their goals reasonably and also higher so that they can achieve those. What does winning look like on the other side of change? So, after we do a change, how can we be more proactive, and how do we know that we've made a good change?
I think part of it involves the change process. So a lot of the times I worked with one client, for example, and he was just starting out selling stuff on Amazon and getting bigger, not just being himself. And he wanted to make all these changes. So I said, "What's the goal?" He's like, "I just want more sales." I'm like, "No, you need a smart goal, like something that's specific, time relevant, the whole shebang." And he's like, "Oh, well, I don't know." I'm like, "How will you know if the change was successful at the end?" So I think a lot of it depends on how well you know your goal when you make the change. And if you know exactly what you're looking for, say, the standard one, a 20% increase in sales, if you don't meet that goal, then you know the change wasn't successful and you can go back and look at the situation again. So I think that knowing the goal to begin with is helpful. And then at the end, you can say, all right, this was our goal. Did it work, or did something else come out of it?
Yeah, I like how you go back to the SMART objectives or SMART goals. When I'm teaching my classes, I talk about that, the, the specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time oriented. But yeah, I mean, you don't know if your changes are going to be effective until you've measured them. And then those are the ways you can measure them and set time limits on them. And then that's when you figure out if you need to adjust your strategy or staffing or whatever you got to do.
Exactly.
So, when we got changes going on, how as leaders do we need to communicate that to our employees and making sure that they know that, hey, we're not doing this change just because it's an idea that we've come up with, but it's, something we've measured or we've evaluated, and make sure that we get that full commitment from those employees.
Well, we talked about the whole having the people be part of the change. So that's obviously a big part of it. Is you don't make them feel like you're coming at them as big boss man from a room they've never seen, and do this now. A lot of it will involve coming to them not as an equal, because you are their leader, but as somebody willing to work with them and talk with them and say, these are the changes that we think would be useful. These are all the reasons. No kid ever likes being told because I said so. Well, as a kid, you have to hear that. That's just, you don't have a choice. But as an adult, you're not going to like it, and you shouldn't have to have someone say, change because I said so. In a work setting, you should be able to say, change because this will help our business with this, because you're a committed person to your business. So I think if we go to them with the reasons and the layout, and ask them what do they think and work with them to change, that's honestly the best way to get a group to change.
Definitely. And I always go back to the Chick-fil-A philosophy. They all say my pleasure. And that's not just because they like to say it, because someone taught them that's what you say there. And it all goes back to your building that culture or building that change that's going to reflect the goal. And the goal there is to build that personal relationship with the customer by saying it's my pleasure. But it's better than thank you, because everybody says thank you.
Exactly. That's actually, I grew up in prime Chick-fil-A world in middle Georgia. And a lot of the times I'd have people asking me, well, why did they say that? People not from there. I'm like, because it shows they care about you, and they're not just saying, oh, thanks, oh, you're welcome, because everybody says that. You got to stand out.
Yeah, and you you notice when you go there and they don't say it.
Oh yeah.
And it kind of stands out, oh, that person that must still be in training or something like that. And then it goes up from there. I've been a part of corporations that, we've changed entire org structures, or we've, laid off people. But it's all about the messaging afterwards, that we can push that down and kind of message what the deal is, and keep that commitment. On that note, we've got to make that big change, build that coalition, and that's going to guide that change. I think as the leaders of the organization, we're going to have to build a team, and it can't always be the frontline personnel. So how can we build that team?
Yeah, I agree. Definitely, a lot of the times you think, okay, I'm going to pick my best people. I'm going to pick all the people to do the best at their jobs. And that can a lot of times create an elite type of group. And while those people might be good at creating the change or doing something, it creates almost an us versus them, as these are all the top people, these are all the top performers. Oh, look at them doing all the stuff. So you want to bring in people that are average at their job but can see the change and are good at talking to the other people and being one of us. And while you need the people that are really good and the leaders and the ones that have always met objectives, having, quote, the average employee is important, because they know what it's really like, and they know everybody there and what it's like day to day, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, some of the big organizations that have done these changes, Apple and uh, that's the biggest one I can think of right now. Apple obviously is changing all the time, and it's because they get feedback from the whole organization. Those frontline people are the ones that are fielding those calls from the people in the field, and talking to people outside the workspace that are able to collaborate and bring that knowledge into that change management.
Yeah, I am not opposed to the survey with reason to take it. If you look at change and you have especially a big organization, like a couple 100,000, even more than that, there's no reason not to say, hey, you want to make your business better, fill out the survey. Not everybody might do it, but you'll get real answers from people that you might not be able to talk to otherwise, especially if you have multiple locations.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the surveys are being out more often now. You get your receipt and they're like, take the survey, take the survey. How about with small businesses? When we got to make changes to what we're doing, how can we, make sure that we're doing it right, or when do we know we need to change, or is it the same as what we've been talking about?
I mean, with a small business, it's so much different, because you can have even 5 people working and doing everything. I joined an interior car supply business for a while, and I was the 5th person, and I was coming in specifically to change their whole marketing layout. And I was a new person, probably about 20 to 30 years younger than the youngest person there. And I'm also not a car person. So seeing what that did really made me realize that change for a small business has to be on a more friendship level. I can't come in there as the marketing expert that knows what's needed. I have to come in there as the friend that wants to help the business, and this is how the business is helped. So I think a lot of times the smaller a business can be, the more friendship you'll take into the need to change, because it becomes more of a family, and you have that, like, family owned and operated. You have to change like a family. You can't just change like a business transaction.
Yeah, definitely. I do consulting and advising, and like you said, when I come in, I'm automatically the bad guy, because I'm looking for the stuff that's wrong, and I'm telling people you're basically not doing that right. So I kind of have to come in with that friend type mindset, where I try to build that rapport pretty quick with whoever I'm working with, and even when I'm walking around buildings or sites, the frontline staff that I run into, and I'm like, hey, you need to work on this. Um, but it's just about reinforcing whatever the policies are, but also making sure that their change is for the good, and for whatever the company wants. So tell me about your advising company.
I run Healing at This Advising, and a little bit of it, it's basically I do digital marketing or traditional marketing. I've done event planning and flyers and printouts, but also content creation and executive coaching. For a while, I did all businesses. Just, when you're getting started, you have to take everyone. But recently, I've started niching into nonprofits, social enterprises, travelers such as myself, and construction companies. Those all have one. Not only do I have a lot of experience in each of those, but they all have a common denominator in that they kind of exist on a realm that's not fully understood. So travelers, they're everywhere. They're not just in one place. So marketing can be a lot harder if they're always moving. And then nonprofits and construction businesses a lot of the times exist off of social media. They have a social media presence, but they do better engaging with the community. So I've started focusing on helping those groups learn how to leverage marketing and learn how to leverage all of these new SEO and website and blog while they simultaneously need to be in their community hosting a 5K or attending a little convention in town. So that's my day-to-day life.
Good deal. Yeah, I was on your website. Got a good layout. I like how you have all your elements there with the icons, and so it's easy to follow. So those listening, if you need any of those services that Ashley just talked about, make sure you check it out. I'll put the URL in the show notes since it's kind of an awkward for the name on it.
Yeah, it's actually the Latin name for sunflower.
Okay.
But I've realized slowly that sometimes people are like, "What is a helianthus?"
Yeah. That's HELIANTHUS advising for those listening. Well, Ashley, thanks for coming on. Any closing words for the listeners?
No, thank you for having me. Really, just if you think that change is needed, or if you see something, even if you're not a leader, then think about talking to other people. Or if you're not a leader, go to your leader and say, "Hey, I had this idea." There is nothing wrong with people who don't see themselves as leaders coming forward to who they see as a leader, because you never know, you might end up a leader yourself.
Definitely. I think some of the best changes have come from the bottom or come from those on the front line.
Yeah.
Change is good. And that's what this podcast is all about is, changing yourself, changing your company, and changing your career path and getting up that ladder. So
thanks for listening to the Leadership Loading Podcast. You can support this podcast on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/leadershiploading to get access to exclusive content, chats, and a whole lot more. Again, that's patreon.com/leadershiploading or visit our website, leadershiploading.com, for more options.